morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Friday, April 21st, 2017. I am Dave Biddle, and I'm very happy to be joined by Patrick Murphy. Patrick, leaving spring for the Buckeyes, let's look at the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball. Let's start with the offense. As they leave spring, what is your biggest takeaway offensively for the Buckeyes?
I think the biggest thing in general that we talked about when talking offense when we spoke to the coaches was the passing game. Obviously, after the struggles of last year, that was the focus. The running game obviously was successful a year ago, and I think they're comfortable with where that is. And obviously in the spring game, that's what they kind of showed off a little bit. Dwayne Haskins passing for nearly 300 yards between his two sides of the ball. Joe Burrow passing for 262 yards. They both throw 3 touchdowns. So what I really took away was the quarterback position at Ohio State is in good hands. I know there's a lot of questions about J.T. Barrett, but I think when it comes down to it, and we talked to Ryan Day the other day, he's got, a little bit of everything. He may not be the greatest thrower in the world. I think he will be better than we saw the last 2 years, but, he can do all the parts of the offense that they think makes up a quarterback, including running, leadership, just kind of commanding that offense. And I think, when it comes down to it, that's what they want in a quarterback. Now, if the guy can throw it, 60 yards like we saw at halftime of the spring game, that's great too. And obviously they need to be accurate. JT was 8 of 12 in the game, which isn't great, but he was also kind of out there with the first team guys and didn't, he doesn't have a ton to prove to anybody here. This is his job, and unless something catastrophic happens, I don't see him doing it. So, but I think the takeaway is not to be, a JT hater at all, but that the future is bright. We didn't see a ton of Tate Martell, but he looked comfortable, I thought, when he came in the fourth quarter. And of course, they've got Emory Jones committed, coming in next year. So I think I'm pretty excited about what the future of Ohio State quarterbacking holds, and that includes next year. I think JT's in for a pretty big year. I think the talent is there around him. If they can get the offensive line shored up, I think their receivers and the running backs will be good, and he's got something closer to 2014 than he's had since then. So I think that was my biggest takeaway in terms of offense.
At running back, I thought Demario McCall looked really good throughout spring, capped it off with a good spring game. Do you think, is there a chance that Demario McCall will push Mike Weber for the starting job, or do you think it's just Weber's job and then Demario McCall will just be a nice complementary piece? Or do you think there's actually going to be a competition for the starting job between those two?
I don't know if I'd necessarily call it a competition, because I think they very much like Mike Weber. There's a reason he was the third freshman to rush for 1,000 yards last year, and that was while they had a guy named Curtis Samuel taking, a handful of the carries away from him. But, Mike Weber he's not Ezekiel Elliott. And that's going to be what he's compared to. I know we've talked about that before. He's not a do-everything running back. So, I think they've got some complementary pieces here, not only in J.K. Dobbins, but not only in Demario McCall, but also J.K. Dobbins and maybe Antonio Williams. I'm still not sure what exactly his role would be if they go with a multi-headed monster. But, running backs coach Tony Alford has mentioned that in the past. Obviously, with a guy like Zeke, they didn't need to do that. Last year, I don't think they felt they had trust in enough of these guys to go beyond Weber and Samuel back there. And let's not forget, when we're talking running game, outside of just running backs, the H-backs, whether it be Paris Campbell, whether they move Demario McCall there, are going to get carries too. And if it is Paris Campbell, like it was leaving spring, that's going to be the starting H, I think you've got a guy with running back experience there and has shown in limited time with just the ball in his hand, I'm not talking his receiving skill here, that he can make plays. He had a 91, I think it was, 91-yard kick return. His one touchdown in his Buckeye career came rushing the ball. So, there's a lot of talent, and I think they're going to find different ways to get these guys the ball. But I think it's Mike Weber's job to answer your question, and these other guys are going to kind of be complementary pieces that just enhance the running game, going forward.
Let's switch to the defensive side of the ball. Leaving spring, what's kind of your biggest takeaways you look at the Silver Bullets?
Yeah, I think, we saw the pass game really work, as I talked about a minute ago. I think some people then worried about, what's going on with the secondary, and I don't think there's any issues there. I think they've, proven to me that they can produce quality players in the secondary. And I did like some of the things we saw, especially some of the young guys, the freshmen that came in I think it was Sean Wade who broke up a pass in the end zone. Jeffrey Okudah I thought looked good. I think that they, have a very talented group. I think there's going to be rotation once again. The starters are going to be, whether it be Kendall Sheffield transferring in or David Arnett on one side. I think that you've got a pretty talented group in there, and I don't worry about that, I guess, as some people might have from the way that the offense was able to move the ball down the field. Passing the spring game was set up for offense with no tackling early on and things like that. But there's that, and then I think the defensive line is just loaded, and that's just going to be fun to watch to see how they can use all of those guys and all of that talent. And we haven't even seen Chase Young, an All-American, coming in yet.
Yeah, you mentioned up front how talented they are, and there's no doubt about it. I mean, the defensive end, I don't know if I've seen the team in college football, period. And not that I've studied every defensive line ever in college football, but at defensive end, it's amazing how elite they are. And Urban Meyer's talked about, he keeps using the word elite. And, yeah, when Nick Bosa and Jalen Holmes are your quote-unquote backups, you're elite. And you got a guy like Jonathan Cooper that how is he going to see the field? He's third team. He might be starting most places. You mentioned Chase Young. How are they going to get him on the field? So defensive end, it's amazing how stacked they are. And I like some of their defensive tackles, too. Draymond Jones, B.B. Landers. I like some of those guys a lot. My question to you is, do they have enough beef up front at defensive tackle? I'm seeing a lot of guys that were former defensive ends that have moved inside the defensive tackle, or a guy like B.B. Landers that's always been undersized but gets the job done. I'd like to see one or two, 320-pound defensive tackles up there to mix in there as well. I think in most games, Patrick, it won't affect them, but against a team like Penn State, or if they make the playoff again, if they face a team like Alabama that can run right at you, my question to you is, do they have enough beef up front at defensive tackle?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it was posed to Larry Johnson the other day when we talked to him to kind of round up spring, and his answer was kind of, well, the defensive tackle position has changed. You need a guy who can do a little bit of everything. And that may be a little bit of coach speak just because they don't have that guy. They're going to have to make do with what they have. It's been one of the big things that Urban Meyer has struggled to get in recruiting. And when I say Urban Meyer, I mean him and his staff. For whatever reason, that's eluded them. So, yes, they don't have that guy. I think we've seen them be successful. I don't think if I look back at any one game that I point to that, any game that they've lost here in the last few years, or even games that they've just struggled in, I'd look at that and say, if they'd had, that 320-pound defensive tackle, that's the difference. They've made do, I think, pretty well. I do think that if they did have that guy, he would certainly be in there. But the guys that they do have played well. You mentioned a few of them. I think that, they have figured out ways to compensate for the fact that these guys aren't the monsters in the middle, and that one day I do believe they'll have a guy who can step in there, but right now I think they've figured out how to make it work, and I think a lot of that is the defensive ends you mentioned. They talked about rotating as many as 10 guys on the defensive line this year, so staying fresh and things like that have kind of been the way to adjust to not having just a monster of a man in the middle.
There's been a lot of talk about the new offensive coaches. I think I might have been a little guilty of this, talking a lot about
Yep.
Some guy named Kevin Wilson. I've even talked a lot about Ryan Day. I mean, there's just a lot to talk about. I'm impressed with both those guys, and that's just kind of been the focal point. I think it's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle that the Buckeyes hired a pretty darn good linebackers coach in Bill Davis. We've had a chance to interview him a couple of times. He's a sharp guy. I think the one concern, Patrick, was, he probably knows how to coach linebackers pretty well since he's been in the NFL for like 25 years doing that, has been a defensive coordinator in the NFL. Can he recruit? The proof will be in the pudding with that, but putting recruiting aside for a second, I'm really, really impressed with Bill Davis. Just your impressions just getting to talk to Coach Davis.
Yeah, I like him a lot. The first time we went through the assistant coaches this spring, he was a guy that I talked to, and I just came away very impressed. The way he handled meeting the media for the first time, and not that any of these coaches don't, they're all experienced with it, but you could tell he's a guy who's been around it and really knows linebackers, knows defenses, knows football, which is just what you want, because you're losing a really good one in Luke Fickell, who not only was a really good defensive and linebackers coach, but really had passion for Ohio State, and you saw that pan out here. But I think Bill Davis is a great replacement. Urban has done a great job of finding these former NFL assistants, former head coaches, things like that, this coaching staff is an all-star group, and Bill Davis is a big part of that. I think what they're doing with linebackers, moving Chris Worley into the middle, is an interesting idea. Bill Davis talked, I think, the other day about how, no more do you really need that big, physical middle linebacker, that stereotypical middle linebacker. I guess I shouldn't say no more, but not as often in college football where you play a lot of spread teams and things like that. And when they do play the downhill running teams, the Wisconsins, he believes Chris Worley can handle that. He's not concerned about his size. And, not only the two other guys, Dante Booker, I think we're still kind of wait and see, but I think everyone believes he's going to be good. Jerome Baker, obviously we saw last year, but they're starting to build some depth at the position, and they like what's coming through the pipeline, which I think is important. So far they've stayed relatively healthy. When they have had to move people in like Dante Booker, Jerome Baker has been ready. That has to continue under Bill Davis. They can't have a step back if, someone has to come out of the game, especially an important game. So I like what we've seen so far, but, the proof will be in the pudding, kind of as you said, come the fall. And then obviously the recruiting thing, I think, will be interesting. But, the way he kind of responded to that was, listen, I'm an open book. You teach me how to do it. I'll do it exactly the way you want. And, then we'll get the job done. So it sounds like he's pretty confident he can step in and recruit. And, he's recruiting for Ohio State. It's not like he's got to recruit for some small program where he really has to sell to get in the door. He's going to get in the door, and from there it's, talking football, talking what he can do for the kids, and I think he's able to do that based on my impressions of him.
Excellent insights from Patrick Murphy. Thank you very much, Patrick, and thanks to all the listeners out there for tuning into the show. I hope you have a great day and a great weekend. Let's hear some Buckeye swag, best damn band in the land. Bye.